Welcome back to my channel. I'm Emily, and today we're setting up all my February book pages, my February stats, and my March intro pages in my reading journal. I know, we're already halfway through the month, but I literally just set up my March intro page this week, so that's how life's going. Anyways, we're going to start out with all the books I read in February. As a reminder, I'll mostly just be talking about how I decorate these pages since I already have my full February wrap-up posted with all my thoughts and reviews on these books. Okay, first book of February was A Love Song for Ricki Wilde by Tia Williams, which is a romance book that does have a bit of a magical element, but I won't tell you what just to avoid spoilers. Our FMC, Ricki, opens a florist shop at the beginning of the book, so I knew I wanted to make this very floral plant vibes. So I found this floral, somewhat transparent paper and a couple floral decals and stickers and such to decorate the majority of this page. I also have many date stickers, and I just happened to have these floral botanical kind of themed ones, and I decided to include the 29th because the entirety of this book takes place in February during a leap year, and the leap day and year aspect is really important to the story, so I wanted a little nod to that. I also decided to add this music sheet at the top left as the MMC is a musician, so that's his little representation on the page. I picked a pretty saturated blue for the marker because of how blue this cover is, but this cover does also have quite a bit of orange and yellow on it, and I kind of wish I had picked one of those colors to tie a little better into the decoration that I decided to do for this page. But, oh well. The next book I read in February was The Maid and the Crocodile by Jordan Ifueko, which was probably my favorite book of the month. This is a fantasy book, but there is a lot of harmony with nature and animals in this book, and there's also a lot of aspects of this book that are kind of exploring natural remedies to different ailments and disabilities and kind of how to use nature to feel better and that kind of stuff. So for the scrap paper, my main one I picked is this very leafy planty paper. I also picked this yellow geometric sort of patterned scrap paper to tie in a little more to the color story of the cover, since this cover does have kind of this like watercolor-esque background, but it's mostly warm with some like golden yellows and some orange peachy tones. I also pulled out a plant leafy washi tape, and also there is a lot of focus on and appreciation of the night sky and the stars and constellations in this book. So the other washi tape I decided to layer with that is a galaxy washi tape that has little gold stars on it, which you can't 100% see super well on camera, but they are there, I promise. For the marker color, I decided on a yellow to really tie in to the colors on the cover, and I think it was the perfect choice for the color for this one. On to the next set of spreads. My third book of February was The Fall That Saved Us by Tamara Jarree. This is a paranormal romance between a Nephilim and a succubus demon, so kind of a bit of an enemies to lovers vibe here, and also lots of succubus related things. I have this like watercolor postcard thing that I was using for a different project, and I ended up with an extra red one, and I thought that this would make a good scrapbook layering kind of thing, but I don't really love how it turned out. It is a little bright as compared with the cover, which I don't necessarily love, and this paper is also way harder to glue down than I thought it would be. The edges especially were not sticking well, but I didn't want to rip up the page at all, so I kind of just went with it after I'd already stuck it on. Our main character, the Nephilim, owns a bookstore, so I figured I would layer some book-themed washi tapes over the red scrap paper and in the top right corner as well. I also added a little coffee cup because her best friend owns a coffee shop across the street from her bookstore, so that's just a little nod to her. For the marker color, I went with this dark blue navy kind of color because the cover is mostly red and blue. They kind of contrast each other in a way. So I didn't want to just end up with only red if I had picked a red marker. And I also think this worked pretty nicely to help darken up the page a bit, since that red in the bottom corner is so bright as compared to the cover. So I think that did a good job at balancing it out a little bit more. Moving to the right side, the next book I finished was The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates, which was my first nonfiction read of the year. This book is all about journalism and a little bit about books, so I figured making this page very book-themed would be fitting. The cover is also very much warm beige, tan, and brown colors, so making this all book-themed also very much fits the color story of this cover. I have a bunch of book pages that I cut out for a project a long time ago. Yes, I know I did destroy a book. Before you come yell at me, it was a copy of Pride and Prejudice that I bought at a used bookstore for like $4 or $5, and it is my third copy of Pride and Prejudice that I have, so I do have other copies of that, and I used it to make my wedding bouquet. So I didn't have real flowers in my wedding bouquet. I had only the book paper flowers and decorative flowers. So I have leftover squares from that still because I cut out too many of those than I needed, so I use those whenever I have anything that I want to have a book background, like my thumbnails. I use them for sometimes, and here too. Then I used some of the same book washi tapes and stickers that I used on the previous page to really get more of that book theme in here. I also did have to pull out my little rating system cheat sheet for this one because I don't read nonfiction as much as I used to, and I forgot what the questions were for some of the acronyms. I did remember what all of the acronyms stood for, but I forgot what my prompt questions were and kind of exactly what I meant when I was rating against these. So I had to pull that out for that just to refresh myself on some of the categories. And of course, I picked a brown marker to really make this all tie into the cover really nicely. And I really, really love how this page turned out. And I'm glad because I also really, really loved this book. Next up, I read Natural Beauty by Ling Ling Huang, which is a literary horror book very focused in the skincare industry, specifically centered around beauty wholesalers. The unnamed protagonist of this book also used to be a piano prodigy before an accident with her parents forced her to leave her conservatory. Because there's a lot of flashbacks to and discussion of her piano prowess, I wanted this background paper to reflect that. So this somewhat transparent background paper is sheet music style paper. For the decorations, I pulled out a variety of plant and nature themed things to kind of tie into the skincare beauty aspect of this, as the skincare company she begins working for is very focused on toting how everything they make is all natural and from the world around them and not chemically enhanced and such. I also printed out this little skincare carousel stand picture to add to the skincare beauty aspects instead of it all just being music and nature themed. For the marker color, I picked this almost sickly looking green that's a bit yellowy to tie into both the cover, which does have a very similar green cover in little raindrop kind of things on it, and also into the page decor as well. Then I read A Study in Drowning by Ava Reed, which is kind of fantasy, but I think veers more into magical realism territory, aside from the fact that it technically exists in a world that isn't our own, but very much resembles a historic version of our world. It's kind of like how the Poppy War very much resembles a historic version of China and the surrounding Asian landscape at the time, but it isn't technically China and takes place in a different world. This book is very much focused on books and storytelling and investigative journalism to an extent, and also has a pretty strong focus on architecture, although I'll leave that up for debate on how well that's actually done. But I knew for one of the elements, I wanted to sketch an architecture style kind of sketch to put in the background where I would usually put my scrap paper. I also had these little library card looking post-it kind of things, And at the beginning, the inciting incident that makes the main character not like her love interest, which I think is very strangely done as a side note. But that inciting incident at the beginning is involving a library and books and such, so I figured I would layer that with the sketch as well to kind of nod to that. I also decided to use a variety of those book-themed washi tapes and stickers that I've been using for a couple pages this month. For the marker, I picked a dark, somewhat desaturated blue to try to match the cover, since the majority of this page matches more the vibes of the inside of the book than the outside. This blue also does much more match the original cover, whereas the cover sticker I printed for my journal is the version that I have from a book box, which is more teal, so the marker doesn't super match the cover all the way, but alas, here we are. On to the last book I read in February, which was How to Read Now by Elaine Castillo, which is also a nonfiction and very much about reading and books and media and pop culture and all that kind of stuff. I was reading a lot of nonfiction last month because I also was pretty deep in Cast, even though I didn't quite end up finishing it that month. I was reading a lot of it. So I was reading 3 nonfiction books last month, which is kind of a lot for me as someone who doesn't tend to pick up a lot of nonfiction anymore. I decided, since this was pretty book and journalism focused as well, I would kind of use the same setup and vibes as The Message. So I used pretty much all the same elements here that I used for that one. I used the book page and all the washi tapes and everything the same as that one. For the marker color, I ended up using a red that matched the cover red as closely as possible, as that's really the only color on the cover, and I needed something to tie the vibes of the page into the cover. Overall, I really like how this turned out, and I kind of like that both of my nonfiction reads from this month had the same kind of decor and style, since I feel like they both have a kind of similar thesis but are explored in very different ways. So I'm glad that they kind of tie together a little bit and have a little bit of a nod to each other in my journal as well. All right, that is all the books I read in February, so on to my stats page. If you remember or were around at the beginning of February, my February theme was a sapphic vampire gothic theme, and I really wanted to carry that over as much as possible onto the stats page, but I used a lot of abnormal for me art supplies in the intro page, like alcohol-based markers and watercolors that I didn't necessarily want to use on the stats page, as they would definitely bleed through and warp the pages. So instead, pretty much the only element I really kept from the intro page was the font. I copied that over and did the same style font for all the headers and graph titles and everything like that. But as far as the other coloration, I used 2 different reds and 2 different dark grays to make it feel pretty gothic, so that even though this isn't the same color palette as the intro page, it still evokes a pretty similar feeling and vibe as the intro page, which worked pretty well. On to the actual stats, I read 7 books in February, which is just above my average reading speed. Those 7 books were comprised of about 590,000 words across 1,315 pages and 1,328 audio minutes. My shortest book of the month was The Message, and my longest book of the month was A Love Song for Ricki, Wilde. For format, I read 3 books physically, 3 books in audio, and 1 book digitally. The target age demographic of 5 was adult and 2 were young adult. For the diversity and representation in the books I read this month, 4 books had Black characters, 2 books had South Asian characters, 1 book had East Asian characters, 3 books featured sapphic relationships, 2 books had M-spec characters, 3 books had characters with physical disabilities, and 1 book had a character with a psychiatric disability. For genre, 2 books were fantasy, 1 was horror, 2 were nonfiction essay collections, 1 was paranormal romance, and 1 was romance, so quite a variety of genres this month. For ratings, 2 books were 3 stars, 2 books were 4 stars, 1 book was 4.5 stars, and 2 books were 5 stars, giving me an average rating overall of 4.07. For the author breakdown of the authors I read this month, 1 of the authors is a man, 4 of the authors are women, and 2 of the authors are non-binary. 4 of the authors are Black, 1 of the authors is Southeast Asian, 1 of the authors is East Asian, and 1 of the authors is white. And there you have all my February reading stats. Before we move into my March intro page, just wanted to take a quick flip through all of my February pages from the intro all the way through to the stats. Moving along into my March intro page, this one was a bit of a challenge for me. I always really love just doing pieces and portraits of women in March because, Women's History Month. I had some ideas of the kind of vibe I wanted, but I had to kind of marry it all together and make it cohesive. I really wanted something lighter colored since my February was darker and gothic. I also really knew I wanted to do moth covering eyes element. While I was kind of finding the ideas and vibes I wanted for this month, I came across multiple portraits that I really loved where the eyes were covered by either a singular moth, like how I've done it here, or like multiple moths flying off of the face. And something about those pictures just really called to me, and I really wanted to incorporate it into my page this month. In one of the pictures, it was more delicate, and the other one is more like ragey and dark, if that makes sense. So I kind of married them together by having one hand holding that little delicate necklace and then the other hand holding the dagger to be kind of that more ragey, darker thing, which does end up getting partially covered by the title later on, but it's fine. I also knew I wanted some kind of third eye this month because if you remember, or in case you're new here, I'm lightly theming all my intro pages this year off of tarot. And when I was picking out the tarot I wanted to represent this month, I knew I wanted it to be the High Priestess, which is very often associated with femininity, again, Women's History Month, but it's also very representative of intuition and instincts, hence the third eye. For the actual construction and coloration of this, I pretty quickly decided that I wanted to make it lighter and also more seamless and ethereal, and I didn't want to use much black pen on this page, which is not something I do very often. I am very much a outline all of my artwork in black kind of person. That's just how I've always been. So it is a bit new for me to just outline all of them in colors that are associated with what is going to be on the inside. But I'm really happy I decided not to use black for the most part, as it makes the areas I did use black stand out much more. I also did another technique I don't do very often, which is layering different colors of Tombow brush pens to do shading and make the elements a bit more dimensional and stand out from the page a bit more since I wasn't outlining them in black. So you'll see me going in with lots of different colors while I'm coloring this in. Like for her hair, I wanted it to be silvery, but silver hair doesn't always have a shadow that's just darker gray because of the way silver absorbs and reflects light. So I use a paler purple to make it more like silvery and reflecting the light weird than just gray. For a little circle and light beams coming off the eye and also the outline, I ended up using a silver gel pen. It does kind of just look gray on camera, but it is definitely silver and sparkly in person. I am debating going back in and adding a background color of some kind just to make that lighter elements pop a bit more, but I don't know what color I would want to do, so let me know if you have any ideas or thoughts on that. Mostly, I'm just nervous that I'll screw it up, and if I add the background, it'll mess up the portrait somehow, which will be really sad for me because I'm really happy with how this turned out so far, but I do feel like it looks a little lackluster or plain. I don't know. I can't figure out what to do. Please give me your thoughts. Back to the setup, pretty much the only areas I used black for were the moth line work, which I did the moth with a paint pen to make it have a different light absorption than the rest of the page, for the eyelashes on the eye, and for the text for my header of March. I wanted to keep the text very simple and just did this almost kind of typewriter kind of font, and did that on a separate piece of paper to put over the art and make it stand off the page a little bit more. On the left-hand side, I just did the same old setup as this past 2 months. The setup is working really well for me, and I like being able to visualize how long it takes me to read a book. Did end up putting the first day of March on the February spread because March is technically 6 weeks on the calendar, and I don't have enough vertical space for 6 weeks. So my options were either to put the 1st and 30th and 31st on the same line, which would have looked pretty disjointed in my opinion, because I would have either had to move the 1st down to the bottom of the calendar or the 30th and 31st up to the top of the calendar. I could have also combined the 1st and the 8th, which would still reduce space, and I wouldn't really have like the 6 spaces on the 1st and the 8th to fill in the books with. And then my last option was to throw the 1st in February, which would leave me the most space and look the least disjointed in my opinion. So that's what I went with. And there you have my March setup along with all my February pages and stats and flip through and everything. Thanks for watching, and I will see you again for some more bookish things.